Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee here today, and I am starting a little bit late today because I had an incident in my house last night, and the police were here, just getting some statements and collecting fingerprints and stuff. So my apologies for starting late, but I am here, little discombobulated. So bear with me as I pull together the information. And for those of you who may be wondering, we're perfectly fine, perfectly safe. So really want to just thank you today for joining this stream. So today I'm going to be talking about customer centricity, and in particular, what are some of the things that I think companies are not necessarily getting right. In particular, we find so many organizations today are moving more and more towards being customer centric, and I think that's fantastic. But at the same time, you have to wonder, well, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And in particular, how is it working for most of the companies? And so, one of the things that I definitely want to talk about today is what are the big things that people are missing? And in particular, some of the things that I am hearing about is, well, we have customer centricity, but it's one business unit, it's one business line. We have a department over here, like customer service, that has its own personas. And so what happens is when I walk into these organizations and I'm doing my usual interviewing across different stakeholders, and I'm saying, okay, tell me about your customer. And they pull out these beautiful customer personas, and they are completely different from the next department or from the next business unit, even though they're all serving the same customer. And this is a problem, and you've probably experienced this in your experiences with usually larger companies, but even the smaller companies. When you're talking to them, one of the things that happens is that you talk to them and you feel like you're starting all over again, or they don't even understand that you're a customer of theirs, but not with this particular division. Like, don't you know me? Shouldn't you recognize me? I'm a loyal customer with this business unit, and now you're treating me like I'm a completely new person to you. Like, what the heck is going on? So there are lots of reasons why this happens. One of the key reasons could be, for example, that a company may be very product oriented. They are focused on selling products, and each team is marketing their product, but not necessarily marketing to the same customer. And that is that product orientation just goes up and down throughout the organization. The products dictate how the company's organized. P&Ls are organized that way. The incentives around this are all around selling product, not necessarily developing a relationship with your customers. So that could be one of the reasons driving this sort of fragmented way of looking at customers. Another reason might be because of various technology platforms, and that marketing has its own platform, as sales has its other CRM, and service has its own reporting systems and technology systems. So the data and the connections are really located within these silos. So it's very difficult, again, to think about that customer as a single person when you see just different views of them. There may have been various things from historical reasons for M&A, for example, that a company was brought in, that was purchased and acquired. And so rather than go through the lengthy process of integrating them, they just were allowed to continue operating on their own. So even though you may be sharing customers, you would never know, because basically they're still operating as two separate companies. So there's a lot of different reasons why we have this fragmented approach to customer centricity. It's not to say companies aren't customer centric. It's just that we're all serving different customers or different views and sides of that customer. And some research that we did recently at Profit called "Executing on Customer Centricity." I'll put it here as a link here. Hold on, give me a second. Again, just a little discombobulated today. This is the link to that research, and it's called "Executing on Customer Centricity" is the report. And this report really focused on the financial services space, but I think the takeaways from this are still really relevant. And the whole idea here is to focus on what we call the whole customer, not just one side of the customer, but the entire whole customer. When you look at that whole person, understand all of their needs, understand the needs in the context of their entire life, then you begin to understand that customer centricity in a full way. Now, there are a lot of challenges to this. And the one thing that I hear from companies that push back against this is that, well, we're not ready for it. We have to gather our data. We need to make sure our org structure is correct. Then we can be focused on this whole customer centricity. Until then, we're just going to make do with our fragmented, siloed, product-oriented way of thinking about the world. And I think that is just a bunch of hogwash, because our research found that the number one thing that drives customer centricity is culture. It is this mindset. It is the belief that the customer should be the center of everything that you do. And if that customer is a fragmented customer, then your organization is going to follow a fragmented approach to that customer. But if your belief and your mindset is towards a whole customer, and everything around your strategy, your culture, everything is geared towards that whole customer right from the very beginning, that changes everything. And this is the fundamental mistake that so many companies are making. The one big blind spot that companies have, which is they do not focus on that whole customer. Because frankly, it's really hard. It's really hard to tear away these legacy ways of thinking about the customer, the siloed way, the product orientation way, the ways that our P&Ls are all structured. Because thinking about the whole customer requires that we rethink everything. And that is just too much transformation for some companies. But when you do actually do that, when you actually start beginning to think about these customers in a very realistic way, to actually say, well, how do I think about them? What are the ways that we can be doing this in a very different way? If you think about that whole customer, then so many things have to change. So I just want to check and see if there are any comments. Okay, thanks everyone for understanding that it took me a little while to get on today. But please ask me questions about how, and I would love to hear from you also. Like, how are you approaching your customer centricity work? How are you structured? How are you creating the incentives for people to think about the whole customer rather than just one side of them? So a couple things that I want to just put out there about how to actually do this. A couple things. First of all, I just want to put out this wonderful quote from one of the people we interviewed. Let me just put it up here. And let's see. This is a quote from Jonathan Feiner, who is an SVP and CTO at Continental Bank. And what he said, it's not a technology issue. It's an organizational and culture issue. Separate units don't want to share their piece of the wallet of the customer or the ownership of the customer. And I think this is so interesting as a quote, because what Jonathan just really keys in on is the fact that, we are possessive about our relationship with the customers. We've worked really hard to get that. And now you want me to share that customer with somebody else? Inside of banks, for example, you may be working really hard on a mortgage customer and now you have them. But that mortgage customer might be also a really good wealth management customer. But the two sides never talk to each other, because how much of that wallet can we actually have? How do we actually share? What about our databases? And are we even from a regulatory perspective allowed to share that data back and forth between our own business units? So lots of reasons why this just doesn't happen naturally. But I think that the fact is so many people resist even talking to each other about, well, where are the synergies? Where are the overlaps? Where can we collaborate and actually help each other grow? How can we create more loyalty with our customers by simply even just understanding things better between them? And even those conversations don't happen. And as Jonathan points out, people are protective. They don't think of themselves as part of the same entity. So there are fundamental culture issues here that unless you identify them and address them, you won't even begin to be able to touch on the customer centricity issues that are out there. So the ultimate goal here is to align everyone in the organization, across every business unit, across every department, up and down throughout the organizational levels, across different geographies, around one single goal. And that is to serve this vision, this model of a single customer that you are serving. Now, you may have different models of the different types of customers, but everyone is unified on this view of who are the customers we are trying to serve. We can each have a particular point of view, but it's the same customer. And we all understand that same customer at the fundamental, most basic level. And then from there, you can draw derivatives from that, but we're all working off of the same sheet of music around these customers. And I like to say we are then able to sing in harmony in terms of serving the needs of that customer. And if you don't, you just have discord, left and right, disharmony. So this is the way to actually drive impact and growth and loyalty, all the good things that come when you're going through transformations, through digital transformations, and really trying to become much more customer-centric. So I want to go through a couple things, very specific things that you can do to make this better. The first one is to really think about just even the philosophy that a whole customer exists, in that we're going to take all these disparate ideas, all these disparate customers, and unify them into one vision and idea of who that whole customer is. The one approach to that is thinking about having everyone give up all the different models. There was one example in the report where one group spent 2 years going around and negotiating with all the different departments and business units so that they were all advocating to hang on to their unique view of the customer. So they took 2 years to go and negotiate who is this customer going to be. If that sounds and feels familiar, then I think you understand what that pain point looks like. Obviously, that firm didn't move very far in terms of their customer centricity work. And you want to avoid that by setting out from the very beginning that we're going to serve this whole customer. We're going to have one unified view of who our customer is. And companies really struggle with this because it does require that everyone across your organization give up their own models and unify around one. But if you think about it, it's a fundamental question. Are we individual business units with individual customers and individual strategies and P&Ls, and our success rises and lowers because of our own internal success in that business unit or department? Or are we a whole? Are we going to serve and support each other? We're going to find the synergies. And there are things that I could do in my department or business unit that could support another department or business unit. And it may impact my P&L, but overall, the metrics of the organization, and especially our relationships with customers, are going up and up and up. So that whole approach, that whole customer approach is so key. It's the number one step. It's to commit to that. Commit to it at the highest levels of the organization and make sure that everyone understands that and is aligned around that the mission statements, that the strategy discussions all revolve around the whole customer. And if there are any groups that are resisting this, then you have to go to those points of resistance and understand that and address it and bring them back into the fold. So the first step is to commit to the whole customer and to drive that deeply into your mission and to the execution of your strategy. The second thing is to then deeply understand who this whole customer is and gather the data from lots of different places so everyone can contribute to that vision and understanding of that whole customer, but agree that we're going to share all this data. And this is one of the hardest things, amazingly. It's like, I don't want to give you my precious data about my customer, because what are you going to do with it? So this is where culture, again, becomes so important. In order to break down those barriers, we have to start building trust. How do we build trust inside of our culture so that we can even have these conversations, that we are open with our data, open with our learnings, and understand that this is for the higher and better good of that customer and of the company. The third thing to do is to find, once you have those ideas of an understanding of the customer and you're beginning to see where the top opportunities are. It's then to prioritize the connections between these silos or departments or business units and prioritize not so much breaking down those silos. If you've seen some of my other work, I talk about not breaking down silos, but putting windows between them so that people can start talking to each other, sharing information, collaborating. And in the beginning, it's not going to look very smooth. You're really literally going to be standing at the windows and shouting at each other, like throwing data back and forth to each other in batch processes. And it's going to be tedious. It's going to be hard because we're just learning even just how to talk to each other, learning each other's languages, the way our data is structured. So in the beginning, it's going to be kind of awkward. But with practice, with time, it gets smoother and easier. And the processes get automated. And the collaborations become much more frequent and easier. But you have to begin by just prioritizing even just a few of these collaborations, opening up these windows. The other thing I would say is to think about how you want to redefine success. This is the fourth thing, is redefine what success looks like. And looking at the metrics that people are measured against, the incentives, the recognitions, the P&Ls that people have. This is one of the hardest things because if you have grown up in a business unit or a department and you have really understood that this is the way we define success, now to change all of that, to use these metrics against a whole customer is something completely different and foreign. So how are we supposed to be measuring these things against loyalty, against repeat buying, cross-functional selling? This could be really hard to do if you're just driving it as an overall initiative. But if you take your commercial leaders, the people who have the most vested in generating more share of wallet, generating deeper relationships with these customers, then you actually have an incentive built in across these commercial leaders, across departments, across business units, against products, to actually start working together and redefine what those metrics look like. And the fifth thing I would say is really thinking much more about how you actually organize. And the report that Profit put out had some really interesting org structures, and I just want to share some of those with you here. And these are great examples, I think. So the first one, let me see if I can get it to, there we go, animating functions are great. The first one is when you're structuring for cross-functional customer insights. So you have all these different functions, but there is a customer experience capability that goes across functions. And their primary focus is to gather the data, create the insights that each of these departments can use. And that's a big change because instead of each function, each business unit or department having their own customer experience units and working against different models, it's a single unified unit across the entire business. And just having that in way of putting this additional foundation level across every single business unit could be a great starting point. But you may want to take a different approach. And this is another example where instead of a function like that, it's a digital customer experience organization that reports directly to the CEO and then is coordinating all of the customer experience activities within those lines of business. So rather than just being a supporting function, they're actually coordinating all of that. There are best practices, there are centers of excellence, and they're making sure that these things are all happening and they have some of those functions actually in the digital CX department. Now, you'll notice here that there's a direct accountability here for that digital organization back into the CEO. And the third model is a transformation management office, a TMO. And many organizations who are doing company-wide, business-wide, multinational, multi-departments, business units may put in a specific transformation office that is going and developing very specific activities in the line of business. And they're prioritizing things, making sure things that happen. And so there's a chain of command into the lines of business, deeply into them, to make sure that these things are happening too. I spoke with one insurance company that did this in a splendid way, where the person in the TMO centralized office would work with a business unit's CEO and their TMO team to prioritize. And one thing that I've mentioned in the past is when they would come in with a new initiative, they left it to that business unit to say, well, what are you going to stop doing so that you have the time and resources and the budget to be able to do this new thing. So they would work together in a very collaborative way to make all of this happen. So I share this because I think it's really important to be clear that it doesn't matter how you organize. The key thing is to make sure that there is accountability. And this is the key thing around organizational structures. And the key part here is creating that accountability. Who is going to be responsible for making sure that the whole customer is being served? Whose job is it to look after that and make sure that our metrics are aligned, that the collaborations are there to be able to serve that whole customer? Who's going to be the voice of the whole customer, being their advocate deep into the organization, ensuring that everyone in the organization hears and understands who this whole customer is and is able to serve them to the best of their ability? So one of the key points here, again, is that this is a fundamental sea change in the way you think about customer centricity. Sure, there's lots of people who will talk about being customer centric, but are you truly being whole customer centric? And I think that's such an important thing, because unless you do that, unless you are actually thinking about the whole customer, it's always going to be fragmented. And I can guarantee you, your customers will feel that. They will feel just not completely known and seen that they in a way that they need to be. All right, so I'm just looking at a couple comments here. Jay, you have quite a few. Jay Johnson has quite a few comments here. And I think one of the things he's commenting on is that customers are often associated with a one-directional approach of acquiring customers. And I think that's right, Jay. But I think one of the ways to also be thinking about this is that it's not so much just one way going out, because it has to be a two-way conversation that has to happen. I always like to say the relationship part, and relationships are never one way, because unless that customer feels like they have a voice, that they are fully seen by the organization, they're going to go someplace else. And one of the best examples of customer centricity is, I think, knowing when not to say anything. How do you know and sense that my customer's happy? I don't need to sell anything more to them. They're good. How can I be secure enough in knowing that I can leave my customer alone? And my customer's like, yeah, thank you very much. I just was in your store yesterday. I don't need anything else. I think a good example is with like a grocery store. I may go in once a week, or I might go to like Trader Joe's every 3 weeks and like really stock up on stuff and then not go again. If they knew what the last time I was there, and they always know because of my loyalty cards, they're not going to bug me until the next time when I'm about to go again. So knowing when to engage, but also knowing when to step back, is a key part of customer centricity. It's kind of like two really good friends. You can sit on the bench in the park together and not say anything to each other, and you know you're good. And that's where we want to get to with our customer points too as well. So let's see. Jay has another key question. Can a company be customer-centric if they are not worker-centric? And I would say essentially no, because I go back to stakeholder approaches to business versus shareholder approach. And stakeholder says we have so many different stakeholders: our customers, our employees, our communities, the environment, society, our supply chain, as well as our shareholders. And employees are such an important part, because guess who creates customer-centric experiences? It's the employees. And if they don't feel seen and heard, then the customers are not going to be served well. Because unless they understand, why are we here? What kind of change do we want to make in the world? And we feel good about all aspects of this, the whole business, the whole impact we have, not just on customers. The reason why I'm focusing so much on customers today, and Jay, I think you're right, why are we focusing on just customers, is that today, my sense is that the approach that we take, we think about customers in such a narrow way, and especially in organizations. And I think, again, over and over again, I see this major problem in that we can't overcome these historical, bureaucratic, siloed approaches to our business that we have taken historically, how to move past those to be able to see the whole customer and to serve that whole customer. But when I say that, it doesn't mean serving the whole customer at the expense of everything else. So it's, again, this balance and this prioritization. How do you know how much you put into this bucket, the customers versus employees versus the community versus the environment? And that's a key part of the research that I'm doing right now is how do you make these trade-offs? Because there are always trade-offs. And also, how do you take a much more ecosystem approach to thinking about success so that you're raising all boats rather than engaged in a win-lose capitalistic traditional game? So that's another conversation for another time. We'll be tackling more of those types of issues in the new year. I'm very excited to take on those types of topics. And I think to the point, Jay, that you talk about stakeholders. Yeah, I think that's a great way to be thinking about it. Instead of just thinking only whole customers, how do we think all stakeholders in our approach to thinking about all of this transformation? And what I have found is that it is so difficult right now to be able to think about different stakeholders, primarily because we do not have the mechanisms, the measurements to be able to do the trade-offs. So within the traditional organization and business, we can do trade-offs for shareholder value. And we're just beginning to understand how to do that with customers and really just becoming conscious of the fact that we need to do this for employees. The Great Resignation is a huge wake-up call, I think, for people to understand that we really need to take this seriously. This isn't just a post-pandemic thing. This has been building for a very, very long time. And now here's the opportunity for us to really make a difference and think about things in a very different way. So that's what I have for today. Next week, we're also going to be doing a stream. And what I'll be talking about, let me pull it up here, is talking about the Transformation Management Office. And Jay had a really interesting point here. I'll just put this up and I saved this best for last, which is the challenge with TMOs is that the culture change is outsourced rather than embedded in the culture. So we're going to be addressing that particular problem, which is, you think, you put in the transformation office, it's a temporary office, and they're going to take care of transformation. And I'm actually going to take a very different approach to this and thinking and addressing in particular Jay's issues that if it's not my job to transform, it's somebody else's, where I really need to think about it. And then also, very importantly, is transformation ever really completely done? Can you actually find an end date to transformation? Or are we now in a state of perpetual change? So how do we build that deeply into our organization? So tune in next week, next Tuesday at 9 o'clock Pacific time, 12 o'clock Eastern time, for that live stream about why the transformation office needs to transform and actually will become a permanent part of organizations. Thank you again for joining today. I wish you all the best in looking and finding and serving your whole customer, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you. Have a great week.